Okay, hi everybody. It's Paul Green from the business community doing another one of our regular Spotlight on interviews. And today I'm joined by Sue Pardy from Face to Face HR. Hi, Sue.
Hello, Paul.
So we're going to probe Sue and find out a little bit about what makes her tick and how come she's ended up doing the business that she's doing. So before we start that, Sue, do you just want to do a little introduction of yourself and let people know who you are and what you do?
Yes. So I'm Sue, as Paul said, and I run Face to Face HR. Face to Face HR is a small franchise, and I look after the Milton Keynes area. I've been doing that for 5 years on the 1st of July, so it's almost my 5th anniversary. And I help small businesses with the HR, basically. So if most small businesses need HR, but they don't need a permanent full-time resource. So I can be that resource. I can be the outsourced support. I can equally support PAs or finance managers who sometimes get lumbered with HR and it's not their forte. But I'm basically there to help recruitment through to terminations if that's what's needed, and everything in between.
The good, the bad, and the ugly, I guess some would say.
It is sometimes, yeah, often very ugly, but yeah.
Okay, so I'm just interested to know how you came to be doing what you're doing today. So if you could just sort of share a little bit of your background and what had you decide to sort of set up your own business in the first place, then I think that would be interesting.
Sure. So I sort of fell into HR. I didn't do a degree in HR. There wasn't a degree in HR when I was graduating. So I did English literature, which is a really lovely subject, but it doesn't necessarily specify a career that you could go forward with, I suppose. And I struggled with getting a job and went back home to Blackpool, which is where I was living at the time with my parents. And my mum said, well, you need to get a job. So how are you going to do that? So I went to a postgraduate secretarial course and I learned shorthand and word processing skills.
Wow.
So I know. So I had 100 word a minute shorthand at one point, which I wish I'd actually done that before I went to university because it probably would have been quite useful.
Yeah.
But I did it back to front.
So can you still do shorthand now?
I still can remember a few bits and bobs, yeah, right. Yeah. And the typing's been very useful, obviously.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
So the touch typing and things like that. But yeah, I probably made a small fortune doing typing up people's dissertations at the time. So I did it back to front. So I came out with a postgraduate secretarial qualification and a degree, and still didn't have a job. But I was lucky enough to become a secretarial assistant at the National Trust, the charity, and I was known as a floater. That was the term that they called us, because basically there was about 6 of us, and we floated around the building covering for absence and holiday. Because most of the National Trust at the time was quite traditional, and every manager had a secretary. And obviously, when those secretaries went on leave or were sick, they needed somebody to do their job. So they had this internal team of floaters or floating secretaries. And we also covered reception, we covered switchboard. So, if you've ever rung the National Trust back in the mid-90s, you may have spoken to me on the phone. So it was a really good, interesting job, because the National Trust is very interesting and it has lots of different departments. And one of the departments it had was personnel. It was called them. And none of the other secretarial assistants liked personnel. They all wanted the sexy departments, such as press office or historic buildings. And I wasn't that bothered, so I used to get the gigs in personnel, and because I'd been in there a bit, they always sort of asked for me. And I realised that I quite liked personnel, and I then applied to become the secretary to the personnel manager, and I just learned from her. She was the most wonderful person from a point of view of she let me do more or less anything within reason, and I could sit in and watch what she did and why she did what she did and things like that. So I learned a huge amount from her. but they also allowed me to do my personnel qualifications. So I did a diploma in personnel management at night school at the University of Westminster, a couple of nights a week, and that took 2 years. So I got my personnel qualification, and they paid for that, which was, fantastic for me. But they also said, there's very limited opportunities for progression, and there was. So I stayed there 5 years. And I learned everything. I loved the place. I managed to go to a garden party at Buckingham Palace actually when I was there, because it was their their centenary when I was there. So I went there and I met Anthony Hopkins as well, because he launched a book on Snowdonia. So I had a fantastic time, and I was in my obviously early 20s, and it was just a lovely place to be. And I was in London and things like that. But I knew that if I needed to progress, I had to leave. So at that point, I did leave, and I went from from a lovely environment of a charity sector to public sector. I went to work for the National Health Service in Bedford, and that was a baptism of fire. So all the niceness of the charity world, I suddenly learned all about disciplinaries and grievances. And I really sort of started to learn about the other side, and they had trade unions. So I started to work with trade unions and understood, how to get a trade union rep on your side was really, really useful. And they weren't as adversarial as you perhaps thought they might be. They had that reputation, but actually they really were trying to just work, do the best for their member, basically. And again, I was very lucky. I had a wonderful manager, and she said to me, right, I was there 2 years, and she said, right, you either need to decide you're staying in the NHS and that will be your career, or you need to get out because you'll be pigeonholed and other companies won't, they'll be very nervous about taking you on because of your public sector background. I thought, actually, I don't want to be doing all of the, as you said at the beginning, the good, the bad, and the ugly stuff, the dinners and grievances. They were quite difficult, and some of the situations that you found yourself in, being abuse of clients and things like that, it was quite difficult to deal with. So I left, or I got another job, and bizarrely I went from the NHS to KPMG. Again, fantastic opportunity, and that was when I came to Milton Keynes as well. So I've been in Milton Keynes 20 odd years now, and that, I suppose, the KPMG was the first time I'd worked in a big corporate, and that sort of was, I was very lucky, never looked back, and I've worked for some very big companies, and that's sort of how I came to be in HR, and I've jumped from lots of different companies, and I've even worked in Australia in HR, but always in HR, but just, taking on the experiences that I've gained and gathered and learning from them, and really, really, very, very fortunate in that respect. And then I got to the stage, up to sort of 5 years ago, I got to the stage where I was thinking, I was doing a part-time job as a HR manager for a small business in Milton Keynes, but it wasn't enough to fill my week. And I didn't want to, it was like, I don't want to, I still want to do something. What else can I do? And I looked for another part-time job to sort of run alongside it, but it was very difficult at the time. There weren't those available, and they're always highly competitive anyway. And I thought, well, I'd just come from a job looking after small businesses as an employee, and I really, really enjoyed it. And that was my sort of first venture into looking after small businesses. And I thought, why not give it a go? And I don't know how I find face-to-face, but it sort of filled that need that I was quite scared about going out on my own, and about, would I have enough credibility? Would I have enough, those nervousness things, I suppose, that a lot of people have. I did it through a franchise, so I've always got the backup of my franchisor and equally my other franchisee colleagues as well, and we discuss, different queries and concerns that we might have, and they're equally a great support group, because HR can be quite lonely because, you know, you are dealing with very confidential things as well. So that sort of 5 years ago, I decided to take the plunge and bought a business, basically. That's how I'm here today. And I'm very lucky with my brand because I feel quite independent. A lot of people don't realise that I'm a franchise. But equally, I feel quite independent. Our franchisor lets us have quite free reign, as long as, you know, within the brand parameters. But I like the brand, I like our colours and all those sort of things that you have to, you know, be appreciative when you go into buying a business. So yeah, that's what I did 5 years ago.
Happy 5th birthday.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what had you choose the franchise option, but I guess you've answered that. It was the sort of like reassurance of having
It was that comfort. Yeah. I mean, it's not for everybody, and, you know, there is an expense. Not as expensive as, obviously, you know, the big named ones, but there is an expense. But you know, it helped me, and you know, I've relied very heavily on my franchisor, and she's also a great legal brain. So if I'm ever got a query about something, because part of dealing with HR problems, because I obviously work on my own, is, you know, have I got that right? Are there any options that I've forgotten? And over a career, you get that experience, so you can use that experience. But no case is ever totally the same. But I can always bounce it off either our franchisor Eleanor or any of my other franchisees with a WhatsApp group, and, you know, just get that reassurance that, yeah, you know, you're on the right track or whatever. Because, you know, the worst thing you want to do is give the wrong information or advice to a client.
Yeah.
So it's great to have that reassurance and, you know, that fallback position as well. And equally, you know, a lot of the branding is all done. I know a lot of people like the excitement of the logo and things like that, but I suppose that wasn't, in my view, my forte. And it was done for me, and I liked it. So, you know, you've got to like it, haven't you? Otherwise, there's no point going with it. But yeah.
Okay. Did you look around at other HR franchises before you chose Face to Face? How did that come about?
I did have a quick look at others. Others are available, but there was a bigger cost, I suppose, and I didn't like some of how specific you had to be with the brand and how your territory, because when I started, I'm the third franchisor. So I'm, you know, so and we've grown now that we're just about on our 14th franchisor. So, you know, that's a fantastic growth. But I suppose equally, when I started, there's nobody close to me, and I didn't have to worry about territories and all that sort of stuff. And to a certain extent, I still don't. So I suppose some of the other, perhaps more better known franchisors have that concentration that you have to be very territorial specific, and things like that. And yeah, I just didn't get the warmth, I suppose. And equally, the costs for me felt quite prohibitive, whereas face to faces weren't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, at the moment we're recording this, we're still in a pandemic, and hopefully eventually coming out of a lockdown at some point, or a bit more relaxed one. And I think it's interesting that with the networking side, of course, the geographic boundaries have sort of disappeared, really, because as soon as you go virtual, you know, when you lose that physical location, you know, even though, as you know, with the business community, I've still got the named meeting as territorial. Of course, you know that there's no restriction for anybody popping on. So I know it has proved difficulty for some people, you know, in terms of where they can and can't.
Yes, it's true.
Their business. They have to, you know, I've had a couple of people recently sort of check, you know, what sort of people come along, and if there is a geographic link to it. Because a couple of the events that I run, I've only started in virtual times. So they don't really have an associated location. So yeah, it has been interesting for those that are very restricted in terms of their territory. So I'm not sure whether you're familiar with the book by Simon Sinek called Start With Why.
Yes, I am. Yes.
Yeah. So that's my next question. Really, is what's your why? What gets you out of bed? What keeps you going? What's the driving force behind your business, Sue?
Yeah. So originally, I suppose it was a basic need for finance and security to fill my week with more HR work, because I couldn't get another part-time job to look up, to sit alongside my original part-time job. So I think that was my original why, but my why has obviously developed over time. And I think I know it sounds corny, but it is about making a difference. So what I found in when I worked for corporate companies, and I've worked for some big named companies, I was just a person. They didn't know who I was. If I left, my team would have been bothered, but that was about it. And working with small businesses, and my smallest client is about 3 employees, and my biggest is about 60. I know that my advice or my training that I do with them is making a difference. I know that because I'm talking to the business owner or the MD, that I've got their ear. They ring me just to bounce something off, because they know, they might have got the idea, the right answer, but they just want to double check it. And it just makes me feel good. It makes me feel motivated that I am doing a good job, and I am making a difference within their business. And I think one of the things I really do sort of harp on about is HR. Most people think HR is about processes, and it is. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of processes, but it is also about human beings. H stands for human. And it's about, for me, not just what you do. So if you're following a process, that's fine. Everybody can follow that process, but it's about how you do it. It's about putting that sort of respect, that dignity. If you're dealing with a redundancy, you can still talk to the people as they're humans. You've worked with them for years. Just because you're following now a redundancy process doesn't mean you lose that, and it doesn't mean that you need to be unemotional dealing with it. And people will remember how they were treated as well. So I think that's one of the things that I try to instill as much as possible with what I do, because there's a lot of HR people out there, but that's sort of my take on it, that what you do is important, but it's how you do it that is absolutely critical. And that's what I try to instill, and hopefully I can, with my clients, I can make that difference, because I'm so much closer to them now.
Okay. And that leads to the next question, which you sort of touched on. But what would you say makes you different from your competitors? Because there are a number of HR organisations out there doing similar things. So what else would you say sort of help distinguish what you do?
Yeah, I think my experience has helped me. So, I haven't just worked for one organisation. I was doing talking to some career students the other day, and they asked how many jobs I've had, and I counted up. Within HR, I've had about 15 different roles. And somebody might go, oh my gosh, that's a lot. But for me, that brings a richness to my experience from all the different cultures I've experienced, all the different ways of managing, all the different cases that I've had. So, I've worked in education, retail, charities, professional services, financial services, a whole raft of different industries, and all of them have their little nuances and their cultures. So for me, that's one of the things that brings, a difference. And then I suppose it's again, sounds a bit trite, but me, how I deal with it, my style won't suit everybody. Of course it won't. But equally, one person's Marmite is, love or hate, isn't it? And for me, it's about finding that right fit. So most of my clients, find that I'm very practical. I've got a lot of common sense, because HR is about common sense. Yes, there's an employment law aspect, but a lot of it is common sense. A lot of it is, understanding people and how you deal with those nuances. So personality does come into it, and I try to have fun, I suppose. it's important. You're dealing with some difficult situations sometimes, and it's important to have a laugh as
Yeah,
well. So
yeah. Well, I know you handled a tricky situation for us with my other hat on, in terms of you know, my club membership and being on the club committee, and you know, you certainly handled that with showing dignity to the person that, you know, was impacted by the situation. And I think, you know, although the outcome wasn't great for that particular person, I think she did appreciate how you handled that, and you know, you did it in as well, in a professional way that got the job done, even though it was quite a, you know, a sad case and
yeah,
a
yeah.
serious situation that you dealt with. So, you know, so thanks for that.
Thank you.
And how have you? It must be quite depressing, I guess. Certainly in the last sort of few months, I guess there's been furloughing, there's been redundancies. I guess there's still some of that to come, and I guess you've been involved in that. How do you cope and manage that when you're going through so much of, I guess, the more the bad and the ugly rather than the good? And how do
Yeah.
you cope with that sort of thing? 'Cause you say, you know, as you say, it's human beings you're dealing with, and you must have seen some quite, you know, tragic and sad cases. So how do you personally cope with that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It has been incredibly hard for everybody. I suppose, you know, emotionally, I am slightly, you know, distant because it's not my business. So from a point of view of that, in a way, helps because I've got that gap. Um, but you are dealing with, you're listening to your clients, and they're in tears. They're
Mm,
you know, they're worried about where money is going to come from. They're frustrated. You know, all of those sorts of things. So you do become a broad pair of shoulders and almost a counsellor for some people. You know, they've rung me, not necessarily any issues, or there is an issue, but it's very small, and I just ask them, you know, how they are, and you get this, you know, well, this outpouring of things, because almost they can't, they've got to be strong for their team, they've got to be strong for their business. So you're that person that they then can offload to, and you know, you can. I remember chatting to somebody on Zoom, and she came on, and I went, "Oh my gosh, are you all right?" And she's like, "What?" And I said, You just, you know, you need a break." And she almost sort of, you could see her shoulders go, and she said, "Oh my
mm,
God, I thought nobody could see it." And I
mm.
said, and she was actually quite embarrassed. And I said, "Please don't be embarrassed. And I'm sorry that I mentioned it." But you could see, and as we talked, you know, you could see that she was visibly relieved that she could just talk about it and share it and things like that, because you become that confident, I suppose. So how I deal with it, oh gosh, I don't know. I sort of, I am quite good at switching off. My husband often says I don't know how you deal with it. But I don't, I'm not, I don't try, I try to, you know, move on, if that makes sense. So
Mm.
deal with it and then move on, and try to maybe have a break, go for a dog walk, whatever it might be, listen to music, try and watch some rubbish TV, just to
Yeah,
switch your mind type
yeah.
thing. But I have got lots of good friends, and equally, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a WhatsApp group for our franchisees, and if somebody's having a bad day, they,
Mm.
you know, we just have a bit of a, I suppose, an offload in that
Yeah,
private space. So that's my
yeah,
private space with people who understand as well.
yeah,
My husband
absolutely.
doesn't always understand.
No, I can imagine. I can imagine. You know, because it's, you know, with people that are in a similar sort of situation and
Exactly.
experience. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a safe place, because
yeah.
you know, you can't go out on the street like others, or moan on Facebook and things like
No,
that.
no,
You know,
no,
it
yeah,
is quite insular, isn't it? But
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
that's what I do. Dog walks, go and have some chocolate, maybe a glass of wine, if it's,
Or,
you know,
or all of the above.
all of the above. Yeah, depending on what the time of day is.
So have you found it since, you know, these Zoom days? I guess you've been restricted in terms of actually going into some clients, and unless you've been able to do that in a social distance way, has it been more difficult doing stuff over Zoom, or has that been a a
No,
bonus to you?
I think it's been okay. I found it quite. I think like a lot of people, I probably did too much Zoom at the beginning, and we sort of realised that it was, you sort of got zoomed out, didn't you? And there was just too much, and so I do try to limit Zooms, what things I book myself onto. So, you know, once a day, but there may be obviously Zoom calls with clients, etc. So I try to do that. But I have been going in. One of my clients was our key workers. Another, in fact, a couple were. So I have been popping in to see them. So that's been quite nice. You know, every now and again, and you know, all social distancing. Has been quite good, and I've sort of worked from there for a couple of hours just to see other people, and things like that. So yeah, it's been okay, but I did get to the point where, yeah, too much Zoom, and because you have to concentrate more, I think, almost, it sounds bizarre that you would concentrate more than in a face-to-face, but it's just sort of very narrow, isn't it? That you haven't got everything else going on, whereas in a meeting room, you often have. And then you've got the journey to and from, which breaks it up and things like that. So you going from one Zoom to another, I found that quite tough.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think we've all found that a little bit tricky at some point along this journey.
Yeah.
So, as I said earlier, we're still in pandemic mode, and that for most businesses would have been the biggest challenge they've faced in the last sort of 15, 16 months. Outside of that, on your business journey, what would you say is the biggest challenge that you've faced today?
Oh, I mean, for me personally, just learning about business when I started the franchise, that was probably the biggest learning curve, because the HR stuff was obviously all right, but I had to learn about accounting, I had to learn about marketing, you know, all the different online platforms and things like that. So I suppose, and networking, I've heard about networking, but I suppose I've got this vision that it was all very cultish with people rolling up trousers and silly handshakes and things like that. And so delving into the world of networking was an eye opener.
I can imagine.
It was, and I was lucky enough to come across your networking at the time. So you've been lumbered with me for nearly 5 years as well. But
that's okay. I see that as a benefit, Sue, not a disadvantage.
But I've met that's the thing. It's just meeting other people that were in exactly the situation and hearing about their stories and their journeys. And I've made some great friends. And you know, I sort of look back at it and I think, gosh, you know, how nervous I must have been at the start and things like that. So yeah, that was probably my personal biggest challenge in employment. I'm trying to think. I suppose it's just for businesses understanding their obligations, and what they have to do and what they should be doing. You know, there's always a difference. So legally, what's the minimum that you have to be doing, and getting that all straight when you're trying to, you know, start a business and you need employees, and there's somebody saying, well, you need this documentation and you need to do this and you need to do that. That must be, you know, very, very overwhelming. And a lot of people are, you know, I suppose that's where I come in, but a lot of people are very worried about getting it wrong and about saying the wrong saying the wrong thing to people. The amount of times I've had to say, you know, just talk to them like you've just talked to me. Really? Is that okay? It's like, yes, just have an honest conversation with them. And I think they're just worried of litigation and being sued and things like that, which is a real shame. It puts a barrier in place.
Yeah, no, I get that. I totally get that. So you kindly agreed to share some of your vast knowledge with us.
Won't take long.
So I'm going to stick you in solo mode. Just hand the floor over to you. So if you hear a thwacking noise in the background, it's me swatting a floor, which is really getting on my nerves.
No problem. I'll ignore it.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. And if you hear a noise, it's my dog going to be sick in the corner. Bless him. Yeah, I think he's all right. Okay, so I just wanted to talk to you about motivating your team on a very small budget. So every employer wants motivated employees who strive to meet the goals of their business. But how do you create a culture that fosters that aim? In a small business where budgets are tight, big pay rises, bonuses, or commission schemes may not be an option. However, for most, money is not necessarily the be all and end all anyway. So here are my 5 tips to help you motivate your workforce on a small or even zero budget. So my first tip is to get the basics right. This may be obvious, but clear communication, policies, processes, and procedures that are followed and applied fairly will give you the best foundation. If your employees don't know what is expected of them, it will impact on their attitude and behaviours. Getting the basics wrong can mean that they do not deliver what you need and will be unlikely to want to go the extra mile when necessary. Similarly, although financial reward is not always a big motivator, real or perceived unfairness in financial reward can certainly be a demotivating factor, so always be aware of unfairness. My second tip is recognise. Recognition is not just about acknowledging exceptional results, it is also about acknowledging consistent, satisfactory, or good performance in your employees. Strong performance management processes often motivate and drive performance better than cash rewards or other expensive perks, and can be used with all employees whether they are underperforming, overperforming, or they are coasting at a satisfactory level. People like to have management take an interest in what they are doing. That said, there can be a place for performance-related rewards, but careful consideration must be given to ensure they will actually give you your desired result and that they will not cause resentment and division in individuals or within teams. Third tip, engagement. An engaged workforce is highly motivated and more likely to deliver improved business performance. Common features of engaged employees can include feeling they have opportunities to share their views with management, being well informed about what is happening in the business, and their manager is committed to them and the business. It can be difficult to know how employees really feel, but there are several methods you can use depending on the size and type of your business. You can gather ideas and feedback informally over a coffee or even lunch. Try a more formal option such as regular employee forums, satisfaction surveys, or you can even go really low tech and just have a suggestion box in the office. Whatever options you choose, make sure feedback is always acknowledged and any issues raised are addressed promptly, even if it's just to say there's nothing you can do and why. Remember, one of the biggest ways to disengage your employees is to actually have a regular employee satisfaction survey, for example, and that just becomes a tick box exercise and nothing changes. Fourth tip, job satisfaction. An employee who feels their job is of value and is a good fit for their skill set is more likely to be motivated. If you want to know how satisfied someone is with their job, the quickest way is just to ask them. This can either be in person, obviously, as a one-to-one, or you can even choose to have anonymous feedback. Where you have an employee who's dissatisfied with their job, you wish to retain their skills, it may be worth investing in additional training or qualifications, or simply putting a development plan together to help them. And my final tip is teamwork. A shared purpose and feeling like part of a team can knit people together in a way like nothing else, and has been shown to increase both employee job satisfaction and motivation. When creating teams or a feeling of teamwork, it may be tempting to group similar people together, but in reality, research has shown that successful teams are more likely to be diverse. This is really useful for small businesses where you might feel there are not enough employees to create teams, but all you need are 2 people to share a purpose, and that creates a sense of teamwork. So in summary, considering the big picture and looking into the more intrinsic motivators for employees will help you achieve a committed, high-performing workforce, even if your budget for remuneration is tiny. And remember, the resulting high performance that you then receive will, with any luck, improve your financial results and then give you more flexibility for pay decisions down the line.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And the fly is now dead. I, I turned the mic off so you didn't hear the thwacking noise. Anyway, so thank you for that. One final question from me then. If you were to give one top tip for any business owner out there, what would that top tip be, would you say?
I think it would be to always bear processes in mind, always bear employment law in mind. However, don't let it stop you having honest discussions with your employees, and get to know your employees, and care about them. You know, particularly in small businesses, it's really, really key that people do get on, and that will start from the top. So if you lead by example with having open and honest communications, then hopefully that will feed down into the rest of your workforce and will become your culture.
Makes sense. James has just put a comment there. I don't know whether you know James Rowell. Great tips, Sue. Really helpful, professional, supportive, and
thank you, James.
So you'll be pleased to know your ordeal is over, Sue. So thanks for your time today, and for, sharing your journey and the content. So thanks again. I'll end the broadcast there.
Thank you, Paul.